And the prisons have been constantly assessed as unsafe. And one of the indicators of how unsafe the prisons are, I've put the picture which appeared in Sunday World a couple of years ago, of prisoners who, the two on the sides of the prisoner and in the middle, are two brothers who are allegedly running one of the biggest drugs gangs in Ireland. And they were able to abuse, physically abuse another prisoner, writing on his forehead, cutting his hair and everything else, and then sending this picture out to Sunday World on a mobile phone. Actually to their mates in the community on their mobile phone. One of the indicators of how unsafe the prisons are currently is that 25% of the population in any given day is on a protection regime. And protection regime in the Irish prisons means essentially 23-hour lockup with no access, just access to one hour's exercise, and that's if the people in the cell are lucky, because obviously they need to be escorted. There are a number of difficulties in terms of escort, even though the Irish prison system has probably one of the highest prisoner-to-staff ratios. A lot of the staff are tied up, as they say, in physical security, which essentially means that there's a guy on the gate who's holding the key for half a day and cannot be engaged with prisoners if they wanted to. And daily serious violence incidents. And that's one of the interesting things. The Irish Prison Service are annually given the number of violent incidents in prison, and their last assessment was that it was at about 700. They were very precise about this, it's at 759. And I thought, God, you're very lucky to be able to do that calculation in such a precise manner. And of course, this is not the truth of the system, because our conversations with prisoners who are in the prisons, particularly in the most overcrowded ones, talk about 2 or 3 or 4 serious violence incidents a day. Just a very, very brief, and this is just a snapshot, 80% of sentences are for less than 12 months. Because one of the things, I should have said, one of the things about the daily population that Shad mentioned, it is about, at the minute it's about 4,200. And Brian Purcell, the director of the Irish Prison Service, his favourite sentence over the last year and a half, since I started working in Ireland, I keep him repeating it. He says, well, it's not my fault, I can't put a full house sign on the prisons because people are being sent from the courts. What he's not saying is that he has enormous exit signs at the back gate, because obviously on any given day, the Irish Prison Service is also releasing about 1,000, earlier this week it was 1,000 people on temporary release. So it's actually well beyond 5,000 people on custodial sentences on any given day. But even that number covers, it doesn't cover, but it doesn't actually give the full picture of imprisonment in the south of Ireland, because we're talking about 13,500 people going through the system each year. Ireland has a very high level of committals to prison in general. 80% of those sentences are less for 12 months, and over 60% are under 6 months. And a lot of the highest increase over the last 10 years has been in short-term sentences. So the rhetoric of dealing with a serious crime by imprisonment in the south of Ireland is actually completely wrong in terms of what the actual reality on the ground is. Because a lot of people in short-term sentences would be in for road traffic offences. There has been over 3,500 people imprisoned for fines last year. There's still ongoing, it's changing now, but there is still ongoing imprisonment for debt in the south of Ireland. So we're not actually talking about even, about the last resort use. Some prisons in terms of population, have 80% of prisoners addicted to drugs and alcohol having difficulties with addictions. There's also very high prevalence of mental health difficulties in the system. 27% of sentenced men and 60% of sentenced women, but this is much, much higher on remand, and also with dual diagnosis. As I said, up to 25% in protection every day, and the system has about a 50% recommittal rate within 4 years. And what's really interesting is when we're looking at those people who are being sent for fines rather than their financial difficulties result in other matter, have the recommittal rate of about 85%. So the system is not, is definitely not working, and Shad said 2 days ago that it's a system in crisis, and I think that's a perfect description of what it is. Other issues, as I said, use of temporary release as a safety valve for overcrowded prisons. The engagement, any kind of engagement for prisoners on their sentence is actually minimal. We were talking on the North-South conference about resettlement or reintegration post-release, which is very minimal in terms of the work that is going on still in the South, and does not encompass the vast majority of people who go through the prisons in the South. The system cannot and will not engage with them. And some of the effects, most recently 2 cases of prisoners with mental health difficulties granted temporary release with no support whatsoever reported in the press. And one of them was in Cork prison, where a male prisoner was granted temporary release with no links to any support in the community, and he slept in the car park of the prison. He was released against the medical advice in the prison of medical professionals, and was left to his own devices, and slept in the car park, and then broke back into the prison. So shows you what the system outside of the prison system in the South is also not very supportive. And Ian O'Donnell, and if any of you were at the first session of the North-South conference, Ian O'Donnell talked about the very significant drop in the number of people who are under coercive detention, and he talks about Macklin laundries, he talks about mental health hospitals and so on and so forth. And he said that if you compare that to the level altogether, we see a very significant drop in coercive detention in the South of Ireland. But the difficulty is that the prison system is now picking up a lot of the people who A, should not be in prisons, B, should not be in any institutions. But the rise of the prison population, I think, mirrors the other changes in the system. So it means that a lot of people who would have otherwise been cared for, cared is maybe not the right word considering the history of institutional abuse in the South of Ireland, but the prisons are sort of replacing. A very big issue in the South, and I'm probably running out of time, is weak accountability structures, including lack of any system of individual complaints. And the lack of interest in that area from the Irish government is astonishing. The European Committee on the Prevention of Torture in 2006 has criticised and has been criticising, and I think that the government has general disregard for national and international criticism. It's incredible how, when you look at the conversations that organisations such as CPT, the UN Committee, actually the UN Committee Against Torture is going to be looking at Ireland for the first time in next year. But a number of organisations, nationally and internationally, have been saying, and I mean, Inspector of Prisons is not particularly radical, but he was saying, look, you guys, you need to do something about this. You need to introduce safe custody limits and so on and so forth. It's like looking at a conversation of 2 people who speak completely different languages and have completely no understanding of what what the other says. And the government is actually just putting their hands up and saying, well, this is, we can't do anything about it, there's crime on the streets, it's rising and so on. Which is also not true. The crime levels in the South of Ireland are actually falling.